listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited cosmos. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, and in the right corner, and in the middle corner today, it is your one and only indefatigable burning ember in the darkness, Jamarl Thomas. Shane Stranahan is not necessarily feeling well today, so I will be running this with my producer and my engineer in the back, and we're going to have a fantastic show. Welcome to Fault Lines. Excellent. All right, let's get into the headlines. Interesting developments that have taken place over the last few days, especially from last week. I think for me, in my headspace, I'm still living over last week with the frenetic energy from that. But there's still a lot of stories and a lot of items that we need to cover. So let's get into the headlines. In the news, about 15,570 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 161 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been about an average of 11,842 cases per day, a decrease of 15% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 46% of the American public has been fully vaccinated. 54% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 33,607,895 people across the United States and has killed 603,758 human beings. 11 people have now been confirmed dead as the collapse of the Miami building, and the 150 others are still missing. No survivors have been found under the rubble since the morning of the disaster. Wow. A poll of San Franciscans, a poll of people from San Francisco revealed that 70% of people believe the quality of life in their city has gone down, mentioning problems with crime and homelessness, with a 753% increase in car break-ins over the last 13 months. A key witness in the case against Julian Assange has said that he lied about Assange in exchange for immunity. In a story published on Saturday, the Icelandic newspaper Stundin quotes the convicted hacker, Surtur or Sigi Thordarson, as saying that he misrepresented himself as a more prominent member of the WikiLeaks than he actually was, and gave credit or gave evidence on WikiLeaks that has now been revealed to be fabricated. Fugitive whistleblower Edward Snowden said about the story that Assange case was now over. And yet, Assange spent 7 years in that embassy, basically being tortured in public. But yeah, the case is now over. Unfortunately, the case is not over because he's still sitting in that prison. That's amazing. That's amazing. I saw the story the other day, but there was no way to validate whether or not the story was real until additional information came out. And I am not going to take that step of jumping the shark as I've done once before. Never doing that again. That said, the fact that the story is legit, the catch becomes, what does it mean? There are all sorts of stories that are legit that are just basically fundamentally ignored. We'll see what becomes of this. Rebels in Ethiopia's Tigray region have retaken the regional capital of Tigray, Mekelle, as government forces retreated from the city. The Ethiopian government has been harshly criticized and continuously scrutinized for its violent occupation of Tigray late last year, following hostilities ramping up with the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. Ethiopia has since called for a unilateral ceasefire in Tigray. South Africa's former leader, Jacob Zuma, has been convicted of contempt of court and ordered to serve 15 months in prison after failing to make an appearance on charges of corruption before the country's constitutional court, which one judge said Zuma tried to destroy by conducting a, quote, politically motivated scare campaign against the institution. And last, 2 Americans who were charged in a Japanese court with helping Nissan's former chairman, Carlos Ghosn, flee have apologized. Ghosn is currently a fugitive living in Lebanon, which has no extradition treaty with Japan. Ghosn is wanted on charges of financial misconduct and fled Japan inside a box for musical equipment aboard a plane. Wow. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That is amazing. There's several of those stories that I really, really want to go back to. The first one I think I want to jump to is right here. A poll of people from San Francisco revealed that 70% have seen that their quality of life in the city has gone down, mentioning problems with crime, homelessness, with a 753% increase in car break-ins over the last 13 months. That is extraordinary. Here's the question. Is breaking into a car a rational act? Now, I understand it's inconvenient. And I understand if you're the person with the car, it is not necessarily the greatest of things to come back and see your car broken into. But I'm asking something a little bit different. Is it a rational act? Does anyone want to break into a car? Meaning, is it the highest aspiration of an individual to break into a car? Yeah or nay? And I would say the answer is probably no, because of all of the consequences that are associated with that if you get caught. And yet, 753% increase in break-ins. If it is indeed not a great thing to do to break into a car, if it's not necessarily something I think people grow up wanting to do, I want to break into a car when I grow up. I don't think that's where people are. Then why is it happening? And again, I go back to, is it a rational act? Is it irrational for people to break into cars? And yet, if it is irrational, why are they doing it? I guess the point that I'm making here is crime is a rational act. And oftentimes the people that are committing those crimes are doing so because they consider other options not as viable, not as lucrative. And when you put that in context, not as lucrative as breaking into a car, what exactly are you going to get out of breaking into that car? And is it going to be something that is going to be demonstrative in making your wallet or your purse better? Or is it just going to be marginal to get you from point A to point B? The point that I'm making here is what is taking place in California, in San Francisco, that is causing those break-ins is something that has happened over the standpoint of a society. And it is not an individual crime that an individual is committing if you have a 753% increase in break-ins. That is somewhat of a societal issue that you need to grapple with. You need to ask yourself some hard questions as opposed to why. Yes, any particular individual that you catch, it's like Batman beating up a criminal. That person in that specific moment was doing something that person probably wasn't supposed to be doing, or at the very least was breaking the law. But it's a different question on whether or not or why the person was doing it. And were there societal factors pushing the behavior despite the individual thinking that they're making a choice? I'm making the point that on some level, this is not a choice. Yes. In individual specific instances, yes. But a 753% increase in crime is not an individual specific thing. And yes, a judge can wag the finger and say, you're a horrible person, we're going to send you to jail. The judge can do that. The judge can totally do that. And the judge can send that person to jail. And the judge can totally absolve society of the responsibility of creating that person that is acting in that way, doing that thing that is running foul of our laws. I'm making the point that if your society has gotten as such where it is difficult, where the pathways of default living is either absent or difficult to find, when the pathways of development, of growth, of self-actualization of a particular person is difficult to ascertain in a society, crime becomes a more rational act. That's the point that I'm trying to make here. Whatever California is doing, whatever San Francisco is doing, it is taking steps, or maybe not taking steps necessary to have all sorts of pathways, all sorts of opportunities in your society where breaking into a car is not the highest aspiration. Think for the moment of the shanty towns. And I know when I say shanty towns, people like to think of Africa. No, think of California, that lefty liberal bastion where Democrats run in the daisies and Republicans have been banished to the sidelines. They have shanty towns. They have basically tent cities of homeless where you can walk for hours in the homelessness community. And when you think of homelessness community, think about how that sounds. And yeah, that should kind of stick in your throat when you think of homeless community. A lot of people without homes living on the streets. Is that something that we want? And other consequences from that, not just to the individuals. Meaning we can say, okay, yeah, the consequences are limited to the individuals, so we don't care about the fact that those Americans are living on the street. You could say that. That sounds horrible to me, but you could say that. If life matters, if life has value, I think we show it in the things that we do, not necessarily in the things that we say. People can say anything. Do those people matter in San Francisco? And the shanty towns, the homelessness, the crime. I'm putting the point that the poverty is the underlying reality of all of that. And that is a societal issue, not an individual one. Yeah, I would imagine if you're in San Francisco and you have a rise in crime, that's a problem. By the same token, if you're in San Francisco, you have a rise in crime and you say, no, I don't want to develop or put money into resources. No, I don't want to increase taxes on the people that need to pay for those particular things or those particular areas. Meaning, if you're not willing to invest resources in your community, then you can't be shocked that you have crime in your community. Those things go in tandem. Yes, you can say it's a hostage taking. That, well, wait a minute. You mean that if I just use my money for my own selfish ends, that those people are going to be homeless? Yes. That they're going to make my city look bad? Yes. The crime is going to go up? Yes. That they're going to accost me as I walk to my cappuccino into my car? That I'm going to have to step over the homeless man to get into my limo? Are you telling me that I'm going to have to do? Yes, that's reality. Fact of the matter is, if you want a society, you got to pay for it. And aspects of society that you have to pay for ensures that those people aren't homeless, ensures that the people that are in difficult straits or during difficult times are not left in the lurch. San Francisco sounds like you need to up your game. And no, that's not just San Francisco. And yes, I'm picking on San Francisco because that's where the story came out today, but still apt. If 70% of the people in the city believes that the quality of life has gone down, then maybe the quality of life has indeed gone down. And if you have a 753% of increase in break-ins, then I'm trying to get across to you that something is wrong. Fix your issues. And I strongly suggest those issues begin and end in poverty. One last point. Defund the police. At this point, I think I've been shown to be right. If you go back and look at Political Misfits, I was always dodgy about the whole defund the police thing because I thought that, A, my mom would never go for that, which means that the public is probably not going to go for that. She's my litmus test in regards to what the public is thinking. And on top of that, you have somewhat of a different issue. Let's say crime goes up, which it did. And you can say that's belonging to COVID, and I would say fair enough. But whatever the reason, crime has gone up. And I would think that on some level, demoralization of the police force and everything else is part of that. And they should be. You kill 1,000 people a year. You should have some feelings about the fact that you kill 1,000 people a year. And yes, there are consequences to doing so, even if those consequences are not expressed in a legal device. And yes, Chauvin went to jail. So what? So what? Chauvin going to jail is not going to end the issues associated with, what do you want to say, BLM, the protests that were taking place. Meaning your core issue was never the cops, even though in part it was the cops. The cops was a side effect. It was an outgrowth, which is the point that I was trying to make. The core issue on this is poverty. If I can get rid of, as a flat fact, it is known that poverty inspires crime because it makes crime a rational act. And if I can get rid of 20 or 30% of poverty, and I suspect the number will be higher because I suspect there will be downstream effects as it goes through time and the communities get better and the schools get better and the kids get better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then why wouldn't I do that? That seems the most rational thing in the world if eliminating and getting rid of crime is your objective. The catch becomes that's not strong enough. We need a fist when we're dealing with crime. Investing money into communities and everything else, just like Joe Biden said, I don't care where they came from. But the point that I'm making is we are building our kids. We are building our communities. We are building our world. And those things are choices in regards to what we invest in versus what we choose not to invest in. And I'm making the point that the human element of this is the part that's dramatically important. That is the thing that is going to etch itself on your world for better or for worse. In the very specific instance of trying to get rid of cop crime, they kill 1,000 people a year. And that is a problem in and of itself. But is it possible to lower that number by getting rid of the need for cops in the first place? And if, by my assessment, the cops are the cheap way out, it's the way that politicians say, we're going to deal with crime by throwing in cops, without really ever dealing with the real kernel or the real reasons that the crime in particular exists in the first place. They're the cheap way out. My point is, stop taking the cheap way out. Stop using cops as let's say, the punching bag for societal ills, which is effectively what is taking place. It's not that they don't kill 1,000 people a year. They do. It's not that that's horrible. They do. But it's being put into situations where they are behaving in that way, meaning stop the situation in the first place. For example, when we get to, what is the kid? The kid with the 13-year-old with a gun. It's like, no, the cop shouldn't have shot him. Yes, you should give more deference as opposed to just immediately maximum justice. By the same token, there's something to be said for why is that kid with a gun in the first place? And if I had a kid that was 13, do I think it's my highest aspiration as a parent to have that kid with a gun? That's separate and distinct from the issue of whether the cop catch a kid. Yes. By the same token, I will be greatly worried and bothered if that kid or my kid has a gun. Then the other questions. Is that normal for that area? Is that something that typically happens? Why does the kid believe he needs that? All sorts of questions that fall down from that. None of those questions gets answered. All of that stuff gets dropped at the lap of the cop. Crime is rational if you allow it to be. And I'm making the point that we can choose as a society different. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us. From mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested